Mark Grayson, otherwise known as Invincible, Earth's strongest hero at this current point in time, and the protagonist of the hit TV show series Invincible, who is going to be the subject of today's analysis. Today we're going to try and analyze how strong is Mark Grayson, mainly because I feel TV show Mark Grayson's strength is actually kinda underrated, so I want to talk about that power level today. Though I do want to note this, I'm mainly going to be sticking to his TV show variant and not his comic book variant. Mainly because the Invincible comics and the Invincible TV show do have a lot more different scaling, or even just events happening in different points in the timeline. For example, Battle Beast's debut as well as the Machine Head arc doesn't happen until Omniman has already left the planet and the Immortal has been revived. Yeah, in the TV show, it's a season 1 arc when Omniman is still on the planet. The reason why it's important to mention is because TV show Mark and comic Mark have some very different feats when it comes to how they fight people, where TV show Mark takes a lot more damage from different people in comparison to comic book Mark, who doesn't take damage until he fights with Omni-Man for the first time. Which led to the impression of some people thinking that TV show Mark is just kinda weak, but in my opinion I don't think so. I think it's just narratively implied a lot more in the TV show that Earth is a bit cracked, especially when it comes to its villains. With the Reaniman being a lot more impressive in the TV show in comparison to the comics, and the fact that Hail Mary even exists at all, which doesn't exist in the comics. But yeah, the entire purpose of why I'm saying this is mainly just so I don't see people mentioning things that happen in the comic books and how the two of them compare, because they are two very different mediums, leading to several different feats that exist, as well as some statements having more or less meaning in comparison to the comics. But I'll get to those when I get to those, so without further ado, let's get into how strong is Mark Grayson. Now I'm not going to go over every single feat that Mark has, but only the really big important ones. So let's start out with his attack potency. Now one of the big feats that people talk about all the time in Season 1 is going to be Mark's redirection feat of redirecting a meteor. Something that people have calculated from town level all the way up to being mountain level. Even with some high ends getting that into small island level, which is rather impressive for Mark in Season 1 to have, but at the same time this is not the upper limit of his feats. After all, Mark in Season 3 actually displays a few more important feats that are really important to talk about for his scaling, and I'm also going to talk about how that affects Mark and his earlier versions of himself as well. One of the big feats that Invincible has in Season 3 is him surviving the Muller twins nuke. Something that I think gets overlooked mainly because it's just a normal nuke, but when people have calculated it, it's a lot more impressive than I think people give it credit for. We already know it's insanely impressive, mainly because of how it looked. Like its fireball in size was comparable in size to the country itself, but when people have calculated it, it has easily gone into the continental levels of ranges. Now keep in mind, Mark punches the nuke, so he has to take the full energy of it, and while this does end up winding Mark a little bit, it doesn't do that much damage to him. But what's even more crazy is the fact that his suit survives it perfectly fine. Like, no damage is taken to his suit whatsoever, not even his goggles break. Meanwhile, characters like Doc Seismic, Mr. Liu, and powerplex are each able to hurt Mark and destroy his suit. So even if you want to apply the Mark is holding back excuse to why he takes damage from them, that doesn't really work for the suit, and that's why I'm kinda more okay with repping the Earth villains, because in my opinion, they're just cracked. It's not that Mark's weak, it's just the Earth villains are strong. However, this nuke feat is even more insane when you look at the lore of Invincible itself, mainly because the Muller twins didn't actually build that nuke. This continental level nuke was just something that the government had lying around. And it's not like it's implied there's some new type of technology since it's the same one that the Lizard League had as well. It's just this super powerful continental level nuke. And they even consider sending that towards Omni-Man for a second, or that being a viable defense against Viltrumites. Which makes the Reaniman, the Hail Mary, and the Hammer all the more insane, at least in my opinion. Especially the Reaniman, since Mark is able to cut through them like butter. Now I'm not saying Invincible himself stops at being country to continental level. What I'm saying is country to continental level characters are a lot more common in Invincible than I think people are giving credit for. Now it should be noted, I'm mainly talking on an attack potency front. I'm not saying that Mark could just punch the air and an entire continent would get destroyed. What I am saying though is that if someone were to survive a continent exploding, Mark would be able to rip through them like butter. Mainly because I know the attack potency versus destructive capacity debate is sometimes confusing for some people, so I feel it's important to mention that. What makes this even more consistent is Omniman's feat of destroying Fraxa, where simply by flying he is able to destroy the entirety of the planet, something that has been calculated before to being small country level. Now keep in mind, doing this doesn't stagger Omni-Man at all. He doesn't really get any damage from doing this or even moving at that speed. However, do you guys know what does damage him? The Immortal, the Hail Mary. Even the Hammer to some degree does damage him, and while the Reaniman don't fully damage him, they are still able to stagger and hold him back a bit. Which leads into even more consistency that the characters that are below the Viltrumite tier do scale towards that country to continental level, because they are able to damage Omni-Man when moving at that speed doesn't damage him at all. Which, speaking of the Immortal, he flat out scales below Invincible, even if you want to ignore a lot of the evidence such as Invincible saying that he is stronger than the Immortal, and Immortal agreeing in Season 2 to get Invincible still not being stronger than him in Season 2. In Season 3, he's kind of just definitively the strongest hero on Earth after he does some training. and he's the strongest by a pretty long mile as well. This gets even more crazy when you remember Doc Seismic is able to capture all of the heroes on the planet, including the Immortal, and they flat out can't break out. Now Invincible is poisoned, which is why I don't think he could have gotten out, but at the same time the others weren't. The importance of me saying all this was basically, country to continental level is really nothing in comparison to Mark, especially when we keep in mind some of the other feats he shows off. For example, during Invincible's training montage, he is able to do something really insane, which is flying to the moon and back. In particular, both due to the shockwave it causes as well as the dust cloud it causes. A feat that has been calculated to be anywhere between multi-continental level at a low end, all the way up to being a moon level plus. Now even if you don't believe this feat itself makes him moon level, there are still ways you can get him up that high, mainly because you have to keep in mind this isn't him doing a punch, this isn't him intentionally attacking, this is just him flying to the moon. Something he doesn't take any damage from whatsoever. Then Mark proceeds to get stronger as well from the training, getting a total of 138% stronger. And in terms of lifting strength, Mark is a beast as well, considering the insane things he has been able to lift. He has been able to lift the heaviest thing that could be found on Earth to the point where Cecil needed to invent something new for Mark to be able to lift. This of course being a massive glacier. But now there's going to be one part of the attack potency section that I'm going to mention before I get onto speed and durability. While I don't think Invincible is stronger than Omniman, I think Invincible and Omniman by this point are in the same tier. Like, I don't think Invincible's on par with Omniman, but I don't think that it would be an easy fight for them either. I do want to cover Invincible versus Omniman in another video though, so please do not talk about that in the comment section, because I want to cover that later. Or you can, I can't really stop you, you can do what you want. However, the importance of establishing this is basically to establish that Invincible in Season 3 scales above the average Viltrumite warrior. So the feat I'm about to talk about should scale to Invincible, which is the feat of Alan's homeworld getting destroyed. Now because we don't know anything about Alan's homeworld, the calculation assumes that Alan's homeworld is the same as our planet's. But it is stated the Viltrumites blew up the planet. So it is more than likely not an overtime type thing. If you do believe it's an overtime type destruction, then you can ignore this part of the video. This has led to 3 variations of the calculation being made in order to analyze how the planet could have been destroyed. Mainly because we see 2 different versions of the flashback. In Alan the Alien's version of the flashback, we see 21 Viltrumites present. However, in Omniman's version of the flashback, we see 12 Viltrumites present. In Alan's version, Omniman's also not there. So they effectively created 3 ways to calculate it. Using the Earth's gravitational binding energy, divided it 3 different ways. One for if 33 Viltrumites are present, one for if 12 Viltrumites are present, and one for if 21 Viltrumites are present, with all 3 of them equaling out to small planet level to different ranges, which is going to be on screen for their different ranges. The importance of this is, Mark should at least scale to that, if not above that, due to being above average Viltrumite level. However, you can make the counter argument that just because Alan the Alien says that his planet was blown up, it doesn't really imply that it wasn't over time. It could have very easily been over time. However, there is some counter evidence towards this, but I am going to have to get into comic spoilers for it, so if you want to skip past it, there will be a timestamp on screen. Frank, when he is threatening Mark in order to let them stay on the planet, states that there is 37 Viltrumites on the planet that would be more than enough to tear the planet completely in half, which kind of leaves even more consistency to it not being an overtime type thing. However, if you do want to dismiss it due to the vagueness of the statement, then I get it. But where a bunch of these feats get even more insane for me is when you remember, Mark doesn't just scale to these feats, he scales massively above them. For example, Mark's moon level feat that I talked about earlier should not be where he caps off at. He should be stronger than that, mainly since that's just from him training. So where I think Mark most consistently scales in terms of attack potency is somewhere between moon level to small planet level, with multi-continental being an absolute lowball. If I'm being honest, it's where I think a lot of the high tiers that are from Earth in Invincible scale. Meanwhile, I think Mark is pretty definitively moon level, if not small planet level by this point, from the 138% increase in strength, and the fact that he shows even better feats later on. Especially if you believe in the Alan the Alien feat, he should definitely be by this point above that, since Invincible should be around the same level of Anissa, who is an elite Viltrumite, with Cecil and his people thinking through simulations that Mark has a good chance at beating Anissa now. Keep in mind, in the TV show, the way they analyze how strong the characters are is through scanning their bone density, which should mean Cecil has a pretty accurate view on how strong the characters actually are. And with Rage, Mark is able to push himself to his absolute limits. Now, whether you think Mark just completely stops holding back, or that Mark actually gets stronger with Rage is kind of irrelevant. Either way, what is true is Mark is able to fight on an entirely different tier in comparison to what he does before, with him being able to even hurt Conquest when he was headbutting him, Conquest being the same person who was just noted to be stronger than Omniman. Now, I don't think Invincible is stronger than Conquest, not anywhere close, but he is still able to hurt him, and that is something that should be talked about. But that's about everything that I have to say for Invincible's attack potency. His durability should just scale at the relative level to his attack potency, mainly because he is able to take his own attacks, he's able to take attacks from people that can overpower him, so yeah, Invincible's durability scales to, if not above, his own attacks. Now, before I get into speed, you can also very easily argue that even Mark in Season 1 and 2 do scale to some degree of Mark in Season 3, mainly because a 138% increase above 90 days with specific training is considered to be impossible, so that should put him above what his natural increases should be, though that's really your opinion, it's up to you. And now we're going to talk about the cancerous scaling that is speed scaling in Invincible, because if you think that attack potency and figuring that out is annoying, you have not seen anything yet for speed. This is because Invincible is one of the weirdest speed scales that I have seen in a long while, where on one hand you have the famous Omniman flying to Flaxa speed feat that has been calculated into the billions of times FTL, maybe even higher. I don't actually remember off the top of my head, I just know it's some insane number, all the way down to Immortal, one of Earth's top tiers, flying at Mach 3. Why can we never escape it? No matter what verse I go to, it's always haunted by Mach 3. Invincible is a pretty clear case of the author doesn't really know how fast things are, so they introduce things that kind of contradict each other. However, if you want my honest opinion, I don't think either of these ends are valid for where Invincible scales. I think the Flaxa speed thing is probably not valid and just travel speed. I do think Omniman does have that level of travel speed, but I don't think he can play it in fights. However, I don't think Immortal flying at Mach 3 is rather consistent either. Mainly because we have characters that are flinging themselves around with lightning like powerplex. We have characters that are casually using lightning-based attacks and light-based attacks. We have characters using lasers. There are just a lot of consistent metas, at least for me, that put Invincible somewhere in between the relativistic categories, all the way up to maybe the speed of light. But I don't think Invincible is crazy high into the speed of light, like only a couple times faster than the speed of light. But I also think that's rather consistent for Invincible and where he scales. I could easily see arguments that he might be faster than that. After all, there's the entire argument that Alan is able to fight at the same speeds he travels at, or at least a portion of it, and Alan is able to scale relative to Viltrumites, so yeah. So for me, I feel like Invincible can scale anywhere in speed, just I'm gonna put him at the lowest possible end relativistic, mainly because he fights way too many lightning timers and is casually moving at similar speeds to them. And I think anything below that is kind of just massive lowballs. Now, Invincible doesn't have that many hacks to talk about other than really his survivability. For example, he can fight for multiple days on end, he's able to survive in space for very, very long periods of time, there aren't that many viruses or poisons that can actually work on Invincible. He's kind of mainly just a punch kick type person. He does have the weakness of a specific frequency being able to damage his ears, something that Cecil was able to exploit, but other than that, he doesn't really have any weaknesses, other than him pretty often holding back in fights. But even then, if you are clearly an opponent that is worthy of strength and actually needing that strength and a massive threat to the planet, he's not going to hold back on you. Now, while Mark is strong and certainly able to fight a large amount of people at once, he does have some drawbacks. He is not incredibly skilled in combat and has a really big lack of experience, considering he's only been a hero for about 2 years by this point. He often fights with emotions, he's not really that much of a tactician. He is going to figure out some tactics from time to time, but he's not the biggest on tactics, he mainly just goes as a pure brawler. Though he has often been shown to do things like discombobulation type moves, which he showed in both the Invincible War as well as the Conquest fight. But the biggest thing about Invincible is his invincible will. No matter how much damage he has taken, no matter how much pain he is in, he will never mentally break. This man's will is really unbreakable. We'll even allow him to continue fighting when his arm is broken and the bone is hanging out of the body. We'll let him push himself far beyond his normal limits to headbutt a much stronger person to death. But while he is a raw brawler, he is also pretty good at adapting to opponents as well. But yeah, that's about everything that I got to say left on how strong is Invincible. I'm curious what you guys think about this scaling. Do you guys think he scales higher? Do you guys think he scales lower? And most of all, please do subscribe. It would mean a lot and help me out. Especially considering in the future, I am planning to go over the entire debate of Invincible in Season 3 versus Omniman, talk about everything that I want to talk about in that debate, because there are so many arguments, and I genuinely think it will be a fun discussion. So, I'm gonna see y'all later. Have a good day.